I think we can slowly start sitting again and start up with the last part of our program. So, as I briefly mentioned before, in this part we will have a panel discussion on the topic of participatory AI and social justice, which is really the topic of the whole project. But we host experts in the field that will be involved in the project in different ways. So we have Christina Harrington, Laura Forlano and Alessandro Bozzon, who will be part of the Parjai project as advisory board, and Cristina Zaga, who is from the University of Twente and will be moderating the panel, but is also the director of the JEDI network. And maybe, Cristina, you can say a few words about the JEDI network when you start? Okay, thank you so much.
We have mics here, right?
Yeah, only two, so pass them over. They should be, they're on, in theory. Try to, yeah?
Does it work? Yay, okay. Yes, so it's fantastic to be here. We had a break, so I think you're all energized and ready for this because you are in for a treat. At least I am excited. And yes, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Twente, which is in the Netherlands, in the middle of nowhere. But I like to stay at the margins. It's where things are happening, and sometimes also magic happens. And I am the director of bottom-up network, if we want to call it that way, which is called JEDI, in a bit corny way, but it was corny on purpose, which is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in AI, whatever AI means, but that we can chat maybe later during the break about it. And it's all about resisting joyfully the AI that is out there to make it more close to what we want, what we need, and what makes sense for society, and in a way that is done with more power awareness. So I'm going to use a lot of technical terms. If you don't understand or whatever, you can always raise a hand, because it's better that we understand each other rather than make it opaque, because we are all about transparency here. So JEDI is all about resisting and also reclaiming AI and reimagine it. And it sounds all nice, all singing and dancing, hippie triagging, but it's not. The idea of the network is to bring together all the people that are working in this space, even the people that do not believe that we can have socially just AI, or they don't think that is the way to go, but to really try to cite an important scholar in a lot of things, Donna Haraway, to stay in the trouble, to stay in the friction, to not flatten the discussion, but to really find methods, tools, and techniques to make this happening, and not just to be putting in our mouth social impact or justice, but to actually do it out there, which means sometimes making mistakes, breaking things, undoing, unmaking. Right? Yay. Okay, so are we all happy to start? I'm gonna start a bit gloomy, but then we are gonna get into hope. A bit, the new hope, just to stay in the Jedi metaphor. Okay. There's people that say that we find ourselves at the crossroads of the 4th industrial revolution and the 6th extinction. Very gloomy. There are a lot of challenges ahead. We have seen it. The last year was particularly tough. It was tough to read news. And it was tough to see that as the global minority, because we are the minority, are facing a new surge of authoritarianism and a new surge of feudalism, this time the techno-feudalism side. Yay. Nice, or whatever that is. But then the global minority, so whoever is not in the West, is actually facing either really challenging things like genocide and war and exploitation, but also bursts of economic development and societal development too. We can learn a lot from them, but maybe we don't talk enough or we don't collaborate enough. These challenging times have also impacted academia, because now here is a nice, safe island of happiness in the Part J project, but the book of the Jedi Network is banned in the US because it talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion in embodied AI and social justice. So there is a growing skepticism towards the intellectual people like us and scientific research and in general social justice, and we need to also acknowledge that. It's not all singing and dancing. But I don't want to leave you with the gloomy things, there are also the exciting stuff. And what I'm excited about, it's the fact that actually a lot of people, by resisting the AI systems that are imposed to us, they are finding their self-realization, new ways of thinking technology, new ways of thinking about we in the world. And I'm thinking about, for example, data workers that are joining researchers in the data workers inquiry to develop frameworks to turn precarious labor that we have seen in the logistics into something that brings about self-actualization. And that's also what we might want to see, but how to get there. And my first question that I want to pose to all of you, and later maybe we can discuss when we are closing off the event, is how can contemporary AI respond to these grand challenges, and how should we approach AI technology design? What is to be done, and what is to be done now? And maybe it's not only participatory justice, but it's also changing a bit the power structures around AI. But here we have the best of the best. So we are in for a treat. And I would like Laura, that published an amazing book with Dania Glabau, Cyborg, for MIT Press, to offer us a lens on how technology is imagined, developed, used, and resisted. Could you elaborate on that?
Okay, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Forlano. I'm a professor at Northeastern University, and I am thrilled to be an advisor to this project on this panel. And thank you, Christina, for such a thoughtful set of questions. So one of the points I want to make related to the Cyborg book is this concept of critical cyborg literacy. So in the book, Dania Glabau and I try to offer up a socio-technical lens, so thinking both sociologically, anthropologically, economically, environmentally, together with technology, for thinking about AI in particular, but a range of technologies. I generally have a very big umbrella in terms of what I consider as technology. And one of the things that we do is offer 10 principles, and these can serve as kind of a shorthand or a reminder of really huge bodies of literature from science and technology studies and other related fields. And we talk about the ways in which technology is situated in specific contexts, the way that human labor is required to make these systems work and run. We talk about the ways that AI systems are infrastructural in that they're connected and layered. So if we think just 2 days ago, there was this major Amazon Web Services outage, and we saw thousands and thousands of businesses impacted by that, right? So we can see that these things layer up together. We talk about leaning into the glitch, so thinking about friction and failure as productive and generative. This is just what it means to live in a society with computation, with machines, right? And those are just a few, but ultimately we're thinking about what it means to be human with technology, ultimately as the biggest question that we want to answer, or that we hope that that we can stay focused on, what kind of human we are becoming together, as we live in societies with AI systems and this mutual shaping going on between humans and machines. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. And Christina, your work provides perspective and methodological pathways to develop technology otherwise, particularly AI technology. Can you share your vision of technology's role in flourishing for us and in flourishing in our everyday life and achieving justice?
Yeah, that's a really great question and an interesting question right now. I think my philosophy and kind of like my evidence-based perspective in a lot of the work that I do is technology as a support and an enhancement, not a replacement. Okay. Okay. So a lot of the work that I do, working with like marginalized groups within the context of the US, working with Black and brown communities, working with people who are living with disabilities and impairments, and working with the aging population, we oftentimes see that those are not the most technology novice or technology, particularly advancements and thinking about like the cutting edge innovation of technology, is oftentimes just not the go-to when we think about techno-solutionism in terms of there's a problem, let's take a device and fix it. Whereas when we think about some of the challenges that are experienced in the everyday that could be supplemented by technology, and we think about particularly your question about flourishing in life, right? There are ways that technology can create spaces to enhance what we're already doing, or can create mechanisms or pathways to enhance the things that human to human or human collectivism is already doing. I think about, for example, like social online spaces. Twitter, before it became the hellscape that it is now, was really one where a lot of folks looked to find like-minded groups that they could engage with offline. It was used for a mechanism of gathering for protests. Like people were actually putting out calls for Ferguson, Missouri via Twitter to say, hey, we need people to get here. And so I think that there are ways that technology in its current instantiation can support some of the calls and the movements around social justice that are happening. But I think, I mean, maybe not in its current instantiations, in some of its former. I think right now, the direction that we're seeing it go, it's actually becoming more of a, I think we're kind of seeing that revolution of, do we need technology to be a part of the future that we're going to have to make for ourselves? Because we're seeing a whole lot more movements towards resistance because of technology kind of being turned on its head, not being turned on its head, but I think the amplification of technology being weaponized against particularly marginalized populations in terms of surveillance, in terms of data tracking, in terms of data mining, in terms of data extraction. We're kind of realizing that technology is almost becoming like the motivation for folks to gather in the ways that they did before technology, because we're having to learn how to like collectively gather to say, okay, how do we push against AI specifically? How do we push against technology surveillance? When you spoke about what's happening with like Amazon workers, we're seeing people going back to grassroots movements because of what technology is becoming. So.
Yeah, I need to ask a follow-up here. Do you think we should reappropriate AI that somehow, and I'm saying AI in a very, like, the most expansive way I can define it, should we reappropriate it and try to make it work in a way that makes sense for us again, because somehow is now too much in the hands of an agenda that might not be our own?
When I think about reappropriation of any system, really, I I love the quote from Audre Lorde that says, "The master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house." I don't know that we can reappropriate something that was never designed for those purposes in the first place. I think particularly, and that's why participatory AI is such an interesting space to be in, because what is the participation redesigning or reimagining or designing or imagining in the first place, because AI was never designed to be a tool that said, hey, you, Christina, as a Black queer Southern researcher from the South in the United States, here is something that we think is going to be great for you flourishing and thriving in life. I don't know that we, even as the global majority, if you take everyone's perspectives, I don't know that that is where we're headed, with even all of the research momentum that's behind thinking about AI critically in that way, because these models are, when you say AI, of what it is these models learn a certain way, they do a certain thing. And I think that there are applications of AI that we can find useful as just a broad human race, but I am unsure of the reappropriation of AI because I'm not sure that it was ever appropriately designed for those things.
Clear. So now maybe let's hear from a computer scientist. Alessandro, you work in human-centered AI, and your work has provided paths for computer scientists and designers as well to make AI more fair, contestable, and explainable. At least, yeah.
I tried. We
yeah,
try.
Indeed.
We try.
Considering your perspective, also your disciplinary perspective, what's the way forward in your opinion?
Easy question there to start with. Well, maybe just a reflection on the path behind, right? So in a way, for me, human-centered AI was a little bit of a Trojan horse, both ways, right? So in the computer science community, to try to smuggle in a little bit of, sensible discussion and perspective about what technology is, what does it mean, what does it do to people. Also on the other way around, to bring in the specificity of what the technology is when we want to talk about and actually do it, again, design it. So perhaps maybe terminological reframing could be a path forward. Participatory AI can be, it's actually a very promising way to think about it. And perhaps in that sense, I would like also to think about how to define participation, maybe beyond human actors. So try to understand, if participation is something that should be looked at, I don't know, from an ecological perspective, for instance, or from a societal, which is not the individual but the collective. So in that sense, if I think about where I want to invest my time, or how people around me are investing their time, I see these two directions. So one, if you want, be more the human AI, whatever we want to interpret that. And from a technical perspective, to move from the current mainstream interpretation of human-centeredness, which is around personalization, to one that is more about plurality and accounting for the fact that there isn't such a thing as a normed experience around using AI, but it's much more experiential and situated. So on the design side, okay, what does it mean to actually have a more than human perspective? And from a computer science perspective, what does it mean to bring in situatedness as a concept in the design, creation, evaluation of AI systems?
Wonderful. That really helps me going forward with trying to get into the nitty-gritty of participatory AI. Because as much as AI is seen as a silver bullet for everything and beyond, participatory AI might also be started to be considered similar in the field. Everybody needs to get involved, everybody needs to be in the design process, yet participatory AI can perpetuate injustice and the social structures that are part of our society. There has been a lot of studies, also a lot of Christina's studies that are really bringing forward the complexities of engaging in participatory research. So Christina, you have worked relentlessly on participation, but in your work you explained that our strategies that empathize participation in design should go beyond the areas of data collection, annotation, and co-design workshops, but also include co-generating overarching AI agendas and policies, and as you were saying, much more also in the power structures, so to say. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? You already have said something, but it's good maybe to go deeper in this perspective.
I really appreciate what Alejandro said about defining what we mean by participation, because I think from a design standpoint, if you go back to what participatory design and what co-design is, and thinking about just at the basic level of engaging those who are intended to interact with the thing, those who are going to be impacted by the thing, in the design of the thing. And when we teach, for example, students about this methodology, we kind of emphasize it infiltrating several different phases of the design process. Whereas with participatory AI, oftentimes what I've found and what we're talking about is saying, let's co-define what the application of AI is, and let's co-brainstorm what, for example, equity in a future for AI might be. But when we think about the actual the computer science behind it, or the design, the actual development of AI, participation thus far, the primary application of participation has been bringing in autorators or evaluators, people that are tagging and engaging with the models in that way. But defining what the models do is where we lack really the ability for participation. Defining the policy, at least thus far in the United States, is where we really lack the current investment in the participation. We haven't really seen the formalization of that thus far, and that's where it's most needed, because where we're seeing kind of this contrast or the conflict, the tension that arises in the participatory AI movement is that you have so many people saying AI is happening to us. We don't really have, like, this just kind of shown up and now it's everywhere. But we feel like we should not have data centers in these particular neighborhoods or these areas of the cities because of the environmental impact that it's having, the impact that it's having on our energy usage. We don't want AI to be something that replaces. And so when we think about where we kind of need participation in AI as a technological platform, but also as kind of just a movement of how society is going in general, is also to think about how do we define what are the bounds of AI and where it can and cannot go? What do we need AI to do? Am I able to opt out? Am I able to say, hey, I don't want, a phone that needs to do all of these things when I just want the basic, capabilities of contacting someone or texting someone? And I also think that participation or participatory AI, really where I think the vantage point comes is the ability to educate and kind of implement participatory, AI literacy. Because participatory AI could really be an opportunity to kind of support that agency by educating folks of what AI is, as you mentioned, because a lot of people, AI just becomes this synonymous cloud that is everything is kind of wrapped up in, oh, that's AI, that's AI, that's AI, that's AI, and a lot of people don't know. So I think participatory AI should less be thought about as, oh, we're sitting at a table and drawing out what we want AI to look like as we think about more traditional instantiations of participatory design, and more so, how do we think about the ways that we're drawing the boundaries and creating the co-creating the policies that kind of need to happen alongside this AI development.
Yeah, and I think then it goes back to Alessandro, because I think there's a question, you gave an answer that is actually serving my question very well. Yeah. So how do you see participation and participatory practices happening currently in your practice and with computer scientists and with engineers? Do we actually look at what is this all about, or we just do it for participation's sake?
It's a good question. I remember when years ago, I think we were discussing participatory design approaches for AI, also with Maria Lucia. One of the first pushback, or the first thought that I had was, wait a second, isn't AI participatory by design? Mm-hmm. Right? In a way, everything about it requires the inclusion of, the involvement of a large amount of people mm-hmm. to sustain its technological underpinnings. And so, in a way, what we are doing is already participatory. We're just doing it at Zoom level and with the technological means that are inappropriate for the purpose. Mm-hmm. So I think there is some push within the computer science research to try to enrich all the technological means through which we enable AI experience, starting from the annotation and dataset collection, for instance, trying to move away from the idea there is a general truth to a particular judgment for a data point or, for a type of interaction, RLHF and the like. So I can see this happening as a embracing of principles that require looking at technology again to be more pluralistic and less personalized. But this is the bottom up, if you want, and there is a lot of work to be done. From a top-down perspective, I think one of the problems we are trying to wrestle with is a problem of accountability. Mm-hmm. That is, who is accountable for what happens when a particular technology is put in place. This, again, in Europe, at the very least, is a question that is really felt in the field of public AI. So every time AI is conceived or thought to be part of our democratic system. And this is where things break a little bit. Because where does the accountability start and where does it end, right? So what does it mean to be autonomous in developing and deploying and controlling AI systems when, you're reusing data sets, or when you are just taking very technocentric approaches to the evaluation? This is where I think an infrastructure of accountability, or perhaps of governance, that is more participatory, can bring in the type of change we want to have. Mm-hmm. And of course, it starts from defining what we should, whether we should use AI or not, first and foremost, what for, second, but also how do we control it as it evolves, and what sort of infrastructure is there, technical and democratic. Yeah.
And again, fantastic, because you really helped me to go forward with Laura, because eventually, again, as a criticism of participatory AI is that participatory AI is usually co-opted by corporate to bring forward their ideas about the implementations, the means, and the et cetera. So eventually to maximize profit. Have you observed this in your work? And how can we pragmatically tackle this issue in a neoliberal capitalistic society, or as TikTok would say, late stage capitalism, bundle of joy?
Great. Yeah, so I think to a little bit reference and reiterate one of the earlier points that Alessandro made, we're already participating every day by using AI systems. And in a paper that I wrote on participation is not a design fix for machine learning, we talk about 3 kinds of participation, and one is the everyday work that we do every time we, I guess, use, whether it's ChatGPT or other kinds of software systems. We are participating, we're just not getting paid. So part of that might be about rethinking economic models or ownership models. The second is sort of participation by consulting, and this is when, yes, potentially it could be academic projects or even corporate projects seek out people that they believe to be experts so that they can get some feedback or some insight into the daily life of individuals, right? And in this example, Liz Jackson and Rua Mae Williams, which are both writers about disability, disabled people also who write about that perspective, they have some really interesting comments about the ways in which they are invited often to provide that feedback but are not getting paid. And so they sort of, as with good humor, they sort of say, thank you for your feedback is kind of the joke. It's like, thank you for your feedback, right? But then the third mode is sort of participation as justice, which I think is what we are trying to understand how to operationalize here. And I do think that the framings, what is an AI system, what is participation, the language that is often created as critical language to have an intervention in the field does get very quickly co-opted. So I think of like a consumer electronics show video from 5 years ago by a CEO from a major corporation about smart cities, and it was like all about people with disabilities in the smart city, and it was all about participation. And so we have to be aware that that's definitely going to happen. Anytime language gets sort of out in the world, it turns into something else. And so I do think a lot about the framings that we're trying to use. So we have kind of human-centered AI, we have these kind of more than human and post-human kinds of framing. We have, are we trying to be human with AI, human for AI? Are we making human-like machines, machine-like humans? Like all these different ways of rearranging the words actually make a big difference in terms of our mental model. And I think much of the discussion that we see in the mainstream media is generally framed as human versus machines, and that is a very dominant framing that gets picked up also in science fiction movies. And the human kind of collaboration with machines is also interesting, and I do think there's like a corporate version of that human machine cooperation, and then there's more maybe ethical versions or academic versions as well. So, but I do think it really makes a big difference what sorts of metaphors and language we're using even to think about participation and AI systems.
Yes, of course.
Can I add really quickly? I really appreciate, Laura, you bringing that up, because I think that's one of the things that I've really been trying to get at, and I almost feel like it's a potentially a provocation for academics and researchers to really think through the model of participatory AI being framed as humans collaborating with the system just by using the system, because it almost feels like a loophole of saying we used to call that type of work crowdsourcing information. But now we're saying that if you're using ChatGPT, you are participating in AI design because you're training the models. But ethically, I don't think anyone that uses ChatGPT would ever consider themselves as participating in designing AI models. But we as researchers are framing it that way, almost as a way to make the work seem ethical, but it's not, because I always hold that a key principle of participatory or co-design is also co-ownership of the outcome. And I don't think the layperson or the mass amount of typical just citizens, those who use the technology without being technologists, would consider themselves co-owners of AI and what's happening with the AI movement. And so I almost think we are treading a very potentially dangerous line by framing participatory AI work already happening as, well, there are folks who are using, it's almost like when we look at, a lot of like privacy statements and people who use social media applications or really any tech app, and saying, hey, you know that by using this app, you're giving this app rights to whatever you post, say on Instagram, and saying, well, that's your participatory, design with social media apps, because you're giving it your images, and so when you then see those images given back to you, either in ads or the things that are targeted for you, well, you participated in that, knowing that a good amount of people don't read those privacy statements. I think we're treading very, very dangerous waters in framing AI participation in that way, knowing that a majority of people, if we were to have some type of signaling or messaging to pop up at the initiation of using ChatGPT to say, hey, you can use ChatGPT to ask this mental health question, but are you aware and are you okay with that then training models knowing these outcomes, knowing some of the recent news articles of suicide and things like that have been motivated? Like if users were to be given all of that information, do we think that we would still have the same type of engagement? To me, that would be participatory AI through human-machine collaboration, and that's not what we're doing as of right now. So I just wonder, right?
Mm-hmm. And then if we have to think about participatory AI otherwise and alternatives, can we think about three specific things, and I will ask it to each of you. So particularly, how are we then relating to AI subjects, as I like to call them, and how are we relating with the non-human, so the Zoe, Geo, and techno entities that are interconnected with us, and eventually, how are we able to extend knowledge production and technological production for real in a not, I will not say fair, more like in a really epistemic justice perspective. So first, Alessandro, given that you work a lot in public AI projects where you bring in contestability and other opportunities to actually regain agency, how is it panning out? How is it working out? Do you think it ends up being mainly performative, or?
That's a tricky question. Maybe before I answer that, just to clarify, I completely agree with you about the fact that we should not reframe participatory AI as, we should not shoehorn what is simply data collection of participatory AI. I completely agree, and I was not trying to make the point. Although I also agree with you about the fact that this is already happening, and therefore we should do something about it. To come back to your question, the risk of participatory washing, I think is one that we know very well from a lot of different type of initiatives where we were trying to bring in citizen. Call it citizen science, call it living labs or citizen lab, and so the performativity of participation is a risk. Becomes a little bit of a ethics theater or a participation theater of the like that we don't want. The experience we've been having in the Netherlands, which is, I think it's a place also where the public attention has been particularly sensitized to the issues of deploying AI, variations of it, technologically, more sophisticated, less sophisticated variation is a bit heightened, is one where public organization, municipalities, the government, try to do good and does come out with interesting intervention, but of course it struggles in being effective. So I can give you an example of that. The municipality of Amsterdam first, and then the government second, created the AI registry. So initiatives through which the life cycle of an AI system that is deployed in public spaces is recorded. So to create transparency and accountability, right? So please look at this. We've been collecting data in this way, and this is how we define the evaluation matrix, and all of that is documented and publicly available, which is great because it's better than nothing, but of course also can give a false sense of transparency and real accountability, because many people just discover that after the fact. So from where we were a few years ago to where we are now, it's a great step forward. Is it sufficient? By no means. How much is AI different from any other form of participatory washing? It's a very good question, because we have experience in the energy transition, we have experience in mobility, we have experience in many different domains. We're trying to bring in the people. It turns out to be a struggle of being really inclusive. Who participates, right? You invoke everybody, but only a few people actually have the means or the interest to be part of those initiatives. How to get people to contest the imposed presence of technological intervention is also interesting, and a project that I was not involved in, but I find it brilliant, of a little bit of designally driven citizen reaction is that this 3D printing schemata for covers for Ring cameras. We all have these Ring cameras everywhere in cities, and we are recording everything all the time, and people might want to work against that. And so a little bit of guerrilla, type of reaction is, well, here is a way you can simply 3D print in your fab lab or your at home, a way to cover it. Right? So just to say, I don't like the idea of being, or recommender system for mobility that use information about which streets contain Ring cameras. So if you want to actually go from A to B, right, without being recorded, here how you can do it. Is that a solution? No. Is that a way to create the sort of awareness that can make people be more involved? Maybe.
Well, wonderful. And now maybe to tackle the other facet that is often mentioned, the non-human perspective, and Laura, you are an expert on this. Typically, AI development is not just about people. There's an interconnected net of others, both other people, meaning people that are not considered humans, and there are many. In this panel, at least 3 of them are not considered humans, just for you to know. And also entities, creatures, and living beings that are around us in our environment. How can we be mindful of these interconnected net of relations? And how are you working on that in participatory AI?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think it's really important to distinguish between transhuman, post-human, cyborg, non-human, some of these. And specifically, transhuman is the framing in which, where you have people that actually believe that eventually we may upload ourselves into machines. So that would be like a very sci-fi, singularity type of style belief system. And that is not the version that I'm interested in at all, but they often get confused and conflated. Secondly, yes, I think, Christina, you made a great point that, when I've advocated for example, cyborg or more than human kinds of framings or post-human kinds of framings, that may not be well received in critical disability studies, gender studies, or critical race studies, right? Because there are all sorts of arguments that like many people are not considered human, so thus why would we then shift to this totally other conversation? So that's, you know, a really important point. But I think for my own research and my own understanding, I use the term disabled cyborg to talk about myself. So I'm type 1 diabetic. I use an insulin pump and sensor system, which I've been using for roughly the last 12 years. So this has allowed me to gain insight into truly what it means to live with a machine day in and day out. And I've actually had, I think, 3 different machines over that time period. So different kinds of configurations, different kinds of software, different kinds of hardware, different kinds of regulatory policies, depending on when those particular machines like went through the approval process with the federal Drug Administration. And so the reason I use the word disabled cyborg is not only because I identify as disabled, it's also to remind me that failure is part of how these systems work and that failure is the status quo. So most of the time, I am fixing something, charging something, configuring something, calibrating something, right? So this is like a huge amount of time that's spent making sure that these systems are working. So one provocation that I have is that, you know, rather than designing for perfection or the happy path, which we often do in the design field, and rather than designing for these individualistic technologies which suit neoliberal business models in the healthcare sector, we might reorient towards understanding what it is to design for imperfection, for failure and breakdown, and also think about how systems could be more pluralistic or communal. So one of the things I've done in the last 1.5 years is to form a group of other type 1Ds that are either scholars, artists, or designers who are either writing about their experience or studying it based on others' experience or creating design projects such as ways of managing type 1D data sets that are not sent 24/7 back to the companies, but like separate apps with different sorts of privacy rules, or making artwork out of that experience, which I think can be a very radical act to bring people together because of the ways in which we are made to individually experience this as a chronic condition and also individually manage it. And this is a wonderful point that's made in a new book by a scholar named Rebecca Monteleone, who really looks at how different sorts of medical devices and how the healthcare sector is made to force responsibility onto patients for self-management, and that is all done through these devices, right? So through hardware and software systems in which we have kind of a black box of design wrapping a kind of black box of technology in which patients have very little ability to understand how those machine learning algorithms work, how they're being used by these companies, and in addition, where there are almost constant, where companies are constantly having to issue letters to the public and to their customers saying, oh, sorry, this thing is no longer working, or this thing was broken, or this thing. So there's the number of cases, like in the US, the way they're regulated is if there are many, many complaints about something breaking down, the company is then forced to issue a letter to notify everyone. So it's similar to other areas of like consumer protection where products get recalled, like the Tesla example that was mentioned earlier, perhaps. So it's just very interesting when you look at a very situated, specific example, such as these medical devices, how you're able to kind of unpack such a wide range of issues that relate to all AI systems. So I hope that's helpful in understanding a little bit better how I'm thinking about what it means to, like live very closely with, this particular machine, but then also how we might think about design designing with that experience as well.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And to close off this part, a way forward is, for example, as you were saying, really sharing completely the research process, which means also sharing and having ownership about research outcomes, decisions, and all of the above. But does it bring about epistemic justice? And what are the current blind spots, in your opinion, given your experience in the field?
That's a great question. What are the current blind spots? I think we struggle. Laura mentioned earlier that participation is not a fix. And I think that one of the things that we struggle with in terms of thinking about epistemic justice or design justice or in any of those constructs is thinking that participation is, oh, we've done it right, as opposed to, oh, we're moving back in the direction of rebalancing scales of democracy and autonomy and agency with these systems. Because even thinking about your example of human cyborgs and kind of living with technological systems on an everyday basis, it's like, where do we really infiltrate or do, not infiltrate, but where do we really highlight and formalize power dynamics of who has agency to say what happens to me, what happens to my community in terms of technology. And thus far, again, thinking about the context of the United States, the hierarchy has been big tech, because that is where a lot of resources come from, that is where there's a lot of push for the systems because of the monetization of it. I think in academia and academic research, that is where we are really concerned, and not more concerned, I don't want to go on record in saying that, but just that is where there's a little more concentration of the concern of the human-centeredness and that return to, or that consideration of power dynamics and agencies. So do I think that is true epistemic justice? I don't know. I think we are attempting to get more of the balance, but I think that there are still going to be epistemic injustices and blind spots, particularly in the AI movement, because of, for again, a lot of the work that I do with marginalized groups, with every technological advancement, there is still a sense of erasure and neglect towards inclusion. If we think about the history of the internet and some of the images that Maria was showing earlier, we can trace the epistemic injustices towards Black women, the misrepresentation and the stereotypes and tropes that are pushed back to print ads. Black feminist theory studies kind of the dynamic of the spectrum of the Mammy and the Jezebel, kind of being the depictions of Black women from print ads to online magazines to internet search. And now we're seeing the same thing with generative AI and things that we have to constantly course correct. And so I think when we think about it in a mainstream, what actually ends up being the minority, it's like, well, we're seeing progress. But in the global majority, in the non-mainstream, the non-weird populations, we're actually seeing much of the same. We're seeing replication, but at a much larger scale, because what AI does is it now produces these images and these representations at much quicker and much larger scale. So I think there we're seeing the blind spots kind of, we're still seeing some of the same representational issues even after debunking them, right? It's kind of like whack-a-mole. Like we knocked it out in print ads, and we knocked it out in internet Google search to say, if I search for professional hairstyles, I'm not only seeing one person, right? But here comes generative AI. And if I put in a prompt to show me, who is more likely to rob a bank, well, here go those issues with, the representation again. And so I think that those are going to be, and it's one of the reasons why I say I don't know that participatory AI is a fix, as much as it says, well, hey, how can we work with, even if we think about on the level of like annotators, to flag to say that this is not going to be the first thing that pops up, that is output by a generative AI model, or to even really define what should be out of bounds in terms of the things that should be able to be generated or should not. I'm not sure if many people know, but for instance, the King family just won its arbitration against, OpenAI, or was it Shuri, against the likeness of Martin Luther King being able to be used in defamatory, being able to be shown doing lewd acts or inappropriate things, because that is where, we're seeing those blind spots of models saying, hey, I want to show this respected political, or whether controversial or not, figure doing a thing. Show me this image, right? And we're having to come back and figure out what is policy, what is regulation, what is that going to look like in this amorphous thing that was just created without the considerations of those things. So I think that we're going to continue to learn the blind spots, and we're going to continue to learn the problem areas. And I think that is why, for me, participation really has to go back to that grassroots of how do we do more public participation of, talking to people and engaging people in thinking through what these systems do and where they go, and what they should not do and where they should not go, because that is the forethought that's kind of really needed to try to move towards it being equitable.
Awesome. So I will ask the last question so we can go forward with the program. Between participation washing or AI silver bullets and the silver bullet of checklists and teeny tiny weights for fairness in responsible AI, we want to go forward. We want a future that is worth wanting. I hope. I want that. I don't know you. Yeah, let's see. But then if we can leave a hopeful message, whatever that is, that could also be, I'm sorry, I'm going to say that. I'm going to take the responsibility of this. Also, fuck AI. Who cares? I just want to be a happy person. I have one life. That's also a possibility. A provocation to keep you alive. So I would like to hear what would be your hopeful message to us and to the world for futures worth wanting that may or may not include whatever AI is.
I mean, I can start. I mean, I think it's very empowering to know when not to use AI and when to refuse it, even if on environmental grounds, right? That would be the... That's AI that doesn't want us to... Oh no. What happened? Hello? Yeah, really.
Grazie.
It's the ghost of...
Yeah. The same ghost that slammed the window. Oh, now this is off, I guess. Hello? Hello? Testing? No? Not yet. Oh. Testing? Testing? No, they're not on yet, I don't think. Oh, hello? Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I think the other hopeful message would be, thinking about designing smaller, less data-intensive systems that are by and for communities. And I love Christina's point, mentioned several times about literacy, AI literacy, and critical data studies like data literacy. No. And the last,
That is hers.
this one?
That one's, this one's. Okay.
Hello? This one? I don't know. This one doesn't seem to be on, but, okay, there we go. So I think the last thing I would say is reframing other kinds of things as intelligence, so that the fact that we continue to play this game of the quest for rationality, this like 100-year-long constant belief that we are becoming more intelligent by having more data or having more knowledge. Instead, we should reframe and look at other things, and we can name them as intelligent, and we can look at more embodied experience and knowledge, and look at things that AI can't do, and call that, make that our North Star.
Thank you. Good luck with the mic. Let me see, something hopeful. Something positive I think that is happening right now is that thanks to this AI bubble, which is going to burst, but is going to leave behind technology, we are able to engage at a much larger scale with the issues that come with digital technology in general and the implications of it, right? So I think this is positive because we somehow went through the waves of web and social media a little bit without a broad social awareness, but now it's on the public, let's say, is in everybody's agenda. And I'm positive also about the fact that we are able to educate many more young students in general, young people, with this sort of these issues in mind, right? So we were able to sneak in a lot of maybe design thinking or ethical thinking, many different education programs. And so the next generation of technologists are going to be a little bit more educated than the previous ones. So in that sense, it's going to be a long struggle, but it's one where there will be more minds and bodies working with it. You only ask for the positive, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then I'll stop here. Yeah.
Well, I think my hope, or something hopeful, is similar to what Laura was saying. I think that the ways that we think about participation are going to grow and expand, because I personally think that resistance and refusal and what we're seeing in this AI movement from a lot of grassroots organizations, from a lot of workers' unions and things like that are also a part of participatory AI, because it is shaping the ways that we talk about how systems are created and how they should be, with agency and autonomy. And so I am hopeful for that kind of, I think the participatory AI turn is also going to be the turn in thinking about participatory design, and the methodology, as well as kind of the movement of societal just buy-in and buy-out, or opt-out. Yeah.
So awesome. I think that this also reminded me of an old Italian song that says that freedom is not sitting on a tree, but it's participation. And somehow it's also a song that reminds us of resistance, la resistenza, that is something that brings about back consciousness and make us think of what we want and why we want it and what matters and what's the most important thing to do. And I think that's the most hopeful thing I can think about, that AI will confront us with this and maybe brings us forward even with conflict and friction, but staying in the trouble, we might be able to do that. Thank you, Cristina, Laura, and Alessandro for this. It was a pleasure to be talking to you. Thank you all for your attention, and please, a warm applause to the panelists.